Hello, and welcome to this, the Rethinking the Human Factor podcast with me, your host, Bruce Hallis, for this episode 8 in series 1 of the show. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the show, let me tell you a little bit more about it. So the show was traditionally aimed at the information security community and the challenges that we faced around how to raise awareness effectively, how to influence behaviour in a measurable way, and how to embed information security into an organisational culture. From our research, very quickly we learned that these challenges aren't unique to the cybersecurity industry. And what we did is we went outside of the industry to speak to people who had research and applied that research across organisations, both private sector, government and not-for-profit, all around the world, to try and get their view upon the challenges we faced within the information security community. And today, I've got the absolute privilege of introducing you to somebody who was voted very recently the second most influential behavioural psychologist in the world. His name is Dan Ariely. Now, Dan's over here in the United Kingdom, currently promoting his new book called Small Change, Money Mishaps and How to Avoid Them. Now, the interesting thing when you read the book is that you start to see the similarities in terms of how we make choices around money and how we might be making choices around whether to comply with organisational policy, whether to follow the best practice that governments have put out there in the general public domain. And I think it's from understanding the underlying root cause behind our choices that maybe we can better design information security frameworks, control frameworks, and risk frameworks. And that's why I think it's an absolute privilege that Dan's going to spend 45 minutes with us today and share some insights into behavioural economics. Without any further ado, let's get on with the interview. Hi, Dan.
Hello, hello.
Hello, thank you very much for popping in.
My pleasure. It's so nice to do this face-to-face rather than over Skype.
Yes, yeah, it's far, far better, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, I generally feel that the community, those are people that listen to the podcast, have been really looking forward to this particular interview. I know when we put the question out there saying, has anybody got a question for Dan? I got so many questions. The problem was, okay, how do I go through this and actually choose a small range of questions? But we know we have got a couple of questions for you.
Great.
And we'll just drop those at the end.
Okay.
But in the meantime, I think it would be really helpful for people to understand, Dan Ariely, who are you and what's your journey been?
Well, so my name is Dan Ariely. I'm 50 years old.
Ah, the big Hawaii 5-0.
The big Hawaii 5-0 was a very interesting experience, lovely. And when I was about 18, I got badly injured, really, really badly injured. I was burned in most of my body, and I was in hospital for almost 3 years. And being in hospital for such a long time changed me in very deep ways. Partially, I was kind of plucked out of society and put on a bed and started observing things from a third-party perception. I was not involved in any of the day's activities. I even remember for months I didn't eat. I had a feeding tube. And then when they took it out and they asked me to eat something, it felt so strange to eat. Like I felt like it was, what is this whole thing eating and chewing? It just felt so strange. But so one thing was becoming kind of a stranger in life. And then also because I'm badly burned, I look a little bit better now, or much better now than I used to, but also people didn't accept me that much, or it didn't feel like it could easily be accepted into society. So it also kept me separated even when I came out of hospital. So that was one. And then there were some specific things. I wrote in my first book, in Predictably Irrational, I wrote about bandage removal and how that got me to think differently about pain and how you optimize pain. I learned about pain medications and placebos. I learned about learned helplessness. So life in hospital was very much defining.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started studying social science, but for the purpose of improving the state of hospitals in the beginning. I really wanted to understand how to deliver painful treatments in a better way. And then I started looking at all kinds of ways in which we waste our time, money, attention, and think about how to improve them. So for the last, 25 years or so, I've been an academic. I've been studying decision-making, behavioural economics, and trying to think about how do we take what we know about human behavior and how do we design the world in a way that is more compatible. And think, for example, about cars, right? We are really designing cars with all kinds of things. We have mirrors, and we have lights, and we have speeds meters, and we have all these things to help us drive better. But when it comes to our mental life, like, savings or spending, we don't really have tools to help people navigate in that regard. And I'm trying to understand where do we fail when we think about money, when we think about relationship, when we think about all kinds of things, and how could we help? And so that's basically been kind of my journey. And the other part of it is that I wrote Predictably Irrational about 10 years ago. It came out about 10 years ago, and that was an amazing chapter in my life. I wrote, including A Small Change, the book we're talking about today. I wrote a few books about social science, and I wrote them in a very personal way. So I didn't just say, here's what we did, but I said, here is my life experience, here's what happened to me, and here's how I started thinking about something. But I exposed myself quite a lot. It's a combination between a social science book and a memoir. And what happened because of that is that lots of people reached out to me in a very personal way. And all the way from, I remember there was one time I sat on a flight, and the woman next to me was so happy that I was sitting next to her. She said she read one of my books, and she was a diabetic patient. And she said she was having a debate about whether to put in an insulin pump or whether to take insulin every day. And in her mind, she had a debate with me, a discussion with me about what to do. And she said I, in her mind, advised her to put an insulin pump, and then that's what she did. And then she wanted to give me the whole discussion between her and me in her imagination. And she was right. I mean, she represented me correctly. So all the way from really great experience, but yesterday I also get lots of emails from people, right? And because I write in a, here is me, I think people write me back. So yesterday I got an email from a woman who told me that she's been dating somebody for 2 years. They don't live in the same place, so mostly they've been traveling while dating, and that he was recently diagnosed with a eye condition, which means that he will go blind in 10 years. And his eyesight is starting to fail now. They can't go on trips anymore. And he wants them to get married, and she's not sure if she can handle it. She's also not sure how he will change.
Yes.
And she wants advice on what to do. So I haven't answered her yet because I'm still thinking about what's I'm not going to tell her do X or do Y. It's not. But to help her think about what parameters should she consider. But I don't yet have the answer for that. So anyway, just to say, who am I? The last 10 years have been, I think, characterized by trying to take social science and bring it into everyday life, which has been incredibly rewarding. I have projects all over the world. Life is exciting and interesting, but also I get exposed to lots of challenges and difficult questions. And my life is a mixture of happiness and exposure to very difficult things that sometimes I can help with and sometimes not.
I think it's interesting the point you make about how when you're in hospital, you almost you got pulled out of how things just happen day in, day out. And that sometimes it's that when you get pulled out, that gives you the sort of maybe freedom, maybe not freedom. It's just a different environment within which to think about what you see going on around you. And that might enable you to see things a little bit more clearly.
Yeah, I think it's perspective. I think it's perspective, really. So when you're in something, much harder to
get a clear perspective. Yeah.
So looking at as a basically late teenager, infatuation, romance, all of those things were very, very part of my life. But when I was pulled out, I would see my friends do things, and all of a sudden it looks very different from the from the outside. I also think that in some sense it created much higher empathy for me, and in some sense much lower empathy. So I feel tremendous empathy to people who are injured. Right? When there's a car accident, let's say, and you hear that 2 people die and 2 people are badly injured, I think about the injured. What a difficult thing it is. On the other hand, sometimes it's harder for me to empathize with people who have first world problems. Right? So sometimes the perspective sometimes is.
It's almost like a luxury to have the problem sometimes when you compare it to other things relatively wise.
Yeah.
It's
that's
small.
right. And thankfully I do it to myself too. It's not just to other people. So I don't sweat small things either.
Okay. So you mentioned the behavioural economics and you talked about sociology. For a lot of our community, who are generally people that have come up from information security, many of whom have come through more technical skill training and environment, what is behavioural science, behavioural psychology, behavioural economics?
Yeah. So maybe the easiest way to think about it is in contrast with standard economics.
Okay.
So in standard economics, we think that people have complete and transitive preferences, that we basically know everything there is to know. We know exactly what we want to do. We can compute all the options. We take the future into account. We don't have emotions. We basically always make the right decision. And if we don't make the perfect decision, it's only because we're missing some information. But there's no computational limitation, for example, or there's no lack of foresight.
Okay.
Behavioral economics behaves more like a regular science without assumptions.
Okay.
And you say, I don't want to assume anything. I just want to see how people actually behave.
Uh-huh.
And we do lots of experiments.
Right.
And we put people in different situations and we measure what people actually do.
Okay.
And lo and behold, when you look at what people actually do, you get a very different answer. Yeah. So, people, as we all know, text and drive and overeat and undersave and you name it. And there's a lot of things, fight about all kinds of nonsense. That's the first part. And the second part is the question of how do you build the world? So economics is not just a descriptive study, it's also a prescriptive study. It's also saying, how should we design a tax system? Or how should we design an educational system? It's like engineers building bridges, right? Mm-hmm. The economists basically build institutions. And behavioral economics, because it says that the building blocks are different, also recommend that we end up building different things. So I'll give you an example from security, and you tell me if I'm wrong in this.
Okay.
So if I looked at something like passwords,
right,
I would say passwords have a challenge that when people set up a password, they don't know if they're going to use this service for a long time or a short time. Mm-hmm. If they want to do it for a long time, they want to think very carefully about the password. If they think they might want to use it just for a short time, they don't want to put all the cognitive effort of putting it. So people might put a very simple password to start with just to try it out. But then, of course, they get used to that password, and changing the password is a hassle.
Yeah.
And it's the default, and now they don't change the password into something else.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one example. And another example I'll give you is that people probably don't understand what's easy and hard for algorithms to figure out. Mm-hmm. Right. What's our mental model of what's an algorithm?
Yep.
I can say an algorithm doesn't know my kids' names. Let me use that as a password. Mm-hmm. Right? Not realizing it's really actually easy to find that, or my birthday. Right? Yes. So now, if you said, what's a good password? Random.
Yep.
Right? But can we generate random? No. Can we remember random? No. So when you come to think passwords, you would say, well, it has a problem between long-term and short-term. Mm-hmm. It has a challenge on what people think is easy and difficult for an algorithm to figure out, or for somebody else. And then it has to do with what's easy to remember. Yeah. And how do you do it? So if you say people are perfectly rational, you would say people would set up really long, complex, strong random passwords. Yeah. If you say, well, no, we don't, it's too much effort, it's not worthwhile, we don't understand what randomness is, and we are afraid we'll forget the password, now you have a very different system.
Right. So in a way, from a security perspective, behavioural economics could potentially, the opportunity could be that you could apply it from the sense of understanding almost like the root cause behind how people make decisions in relation to, in this case, password length and what is random, what isn't.
That's right. So for example, if I was going to create a system to generate passwords, right, it wouldn't be about people making up strings of letters and numbers. I just don't think that's a good system.
Yeah.
What people do vary on, and they don't have to remember, right? I wouldn't use memory. Memory is not one of our best skills.
There's a bit of a flaw in it, isn't there?
That's right. Yeah. So and especially if you say you want to remember lots of things, it's really hard. I would take something like preferences.
Okay. Explain preferences.
Okay, so do you like brown or blue more?
I don't know if I should be telling anybody.
Okay.
Yeah, I tell you what, and then I'm thinking, be random. Say the opposite of what you want to say.
Yeah.
Blue. Yeah.
Okay. So imagine that we took a set of shoes and faces and cities and colors, and we show you 4 of those on a screen and say, which one do you prefer?
Okay.
And we got the things that you have strong preferences for.
Okay.
Now, those things you don't have to remember because, like, for example, do you like Toyota more or do you like Subaru more? I mean, you probably...
Subaru.
Okay, but...
It happened to be blue as well.
There you go. But, if you think about preferences, it's not something you have to remember. It's just something that already exists in your mind, right? It's not something that you have to commit to memory. I can ask you all kinds of things about your rank order preferences, and I don't want to take things that are very, very similar that you might confuse, but there are things that you are very strong and other people have very different preferences.
Yeah.
So if I created a password that is based on your preferences, right? I could use strings. I could use all kinds of lengths of strings.
Yeah.
And you would not have to remember anything. You just need to recognize it when you see it on the screen, right? So I show you 5 different cars, and I say, which one do you prefer? And then I would say you 5 different colors, and I would say which one you prefer, and I would say you 5 different pictures of friends, and I say which one is your best friend, and all of those things, and those will not be a sequence of random numbers that you have to remember. You will need to recognize rather than remember, which is much, much easier.
Yes.
And then it will be about something that is preferences rather than something very, very specific, which is easier to remember. Now, I'm not sure that's a really great idea. Another part is to test things. But if you think about the principle, it says, let's use recognition rather than recall. When you see it, right, you recognize it. You don't have to store it in memory in the same way. The memory trace doesn't have to be as strong.
Yeah.
And then the second principle would be that it's about something that is inherent to you rather than something that you have to acquire from the outside world, like creating a new string.
Yeah. Okay. So preferences then, again, preferences, how are preferences formed? Is that like life experience, or is there an underlying, when we read your books, I've read all of them. Okay, I clearly got time on my hands, but I've read all of them, and I just recently finished the book, the Small Change book, which is your latest book, as well. Is preferences and cognitive biases and heuristics, is this a chasing connection between them?
Yeah. So there are multiple sources for preferences.
Okay.
Right. So there are things that have to do with our biology.
Right.
We like sweet. We don't like bitter.
Okay.
Right? But we do learn. We can learn to enjoy bitter, like in beer, right? It's possible, but we're born with some preferences.
Yeah.
Then there are some preferences that are social that we acquire over time, like learning to enjoy beer or learning to enjoy spicy food. Spicy food is painful, right? But we can learn how to enjoy it. So there are things that are learned, classical music, jazz, and then there are things that we can change at the moment's notice. Yeah. And that's where things that we don't really have a preference for, and we make a decision based on the environment rather than our preferences. And I'll give you an example. There's a company in the US called Express Script.
Express Scripts
is they have an online pharmacy.
Okay.
So here's what happens. You go to your physician and they write you a prescription for a medication, and a branded medication, let's say, and you go to Express Script and they start delivering the medication every 90 days to your house. Every 90 days, you get the medication every 90 days. And one of the things they try to do is to switch you from branded medication to generic medication.
Okay.
So they send people a letter and a postcard and a colorful brochure and all kinds of things to try and switch people from branded to generic. And people basically don't switch.
Right.
So for 1 year, they offered people an amazing deal. They said, if you switch now, we will charge you nothing for a whole year. Right? Branded are usually $20 a month. Generic is usually $5. If you switch now, it will be free for a whole year. They thought everybody will switch. Less than 10% of the people switched. So then they came to me to complain. And why did they pick? Why did they pick me? If you remember, in Predictably Irrational, there's a chapter on the allure of free, on how when something is free, it's a very, very different price than 10 cents, less than 10 cents, right?
Yeah.
And people do all kinds of crazy stuff for free. And they said, look, we tested free and nothing much happens. What's going on? And I said, look, your design actually tests two things at the same time. To stay with branded, people don't have to do anything.
Right.
To switch to generic, you have to want to switch to generic, and then you have to return a letter.
Right.
Or to take an action. Right? Which one is it? It's the no action versus action, or branded versus generic? And now the first test you would propose is you say, let's send people a letter and say, if you don't return this letter, we will be forced to stop your medication. If you don't return this letter, we will switch you.
Yeah.
Right? If you don't return this letter, we'll switch you. So now the switching becomes the no action.
Right.
Right. It turns out this is illegal. You can't switch on people medications. So what they did was they gave people a forced choice. They said, if you don't return this letter, we will be forced to stop your medication.
Right.
But when you return this letter, you could choose branded for $20 or generic for $5.
Okay.
So there's no free anymore, and you have to return the letter, basically. Mm-hmm. And everybody returned the letter. And between 80 and 90% of the people switched to generics.
That's amazing, isn't it?
It's amazing to realize that people just don't care so much between generic and branded. What people care about is not returning a letter.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing. It's not people didn't want to switch. It's just that the transaction cost was too high, right? And you could say it's only returning a letter. It could save them $15 a month for the rest of their lives. And, when people ask me this question, I say, do you have right now a subscription to something that you should be canceling? Some TV station, some magazine, and almost everybody does, right? And it's not that we don't want to cancel, we just don't want to cancel tonight. And that's what is called untapped demand. You could say that there's a big difference between people's preferences and what they end up doing. Mm-hmm. And the difference has a lot to do with friction, with what's more difficult. And even relatively small amount of friction, like returning a letter, makes a big difference. So you can say, yes, we have preferences. Mm-hmm. Some of it is born, some of it is acquired, some of it is individual. But on top of that, the way the preference is translated into action, it's not a one-to-one translation. Right? In economics, there's the term revealed preferences. And what's the notion of revealed preferences? How do we know what people want? Let's see what they do. There's a one-to-one correspondence between what people do and what people want. Mm-hmm. And behavioral economics say not so quickly. In fact, there's what people want, friction, and then what they do.
Yes.
And what we need to understand is that what people end up doing is largely a function of friction as well.
It's the whole, design it so that it's as easy as possible.
That's right. That the right behavior is the easiest behavior.
Okay. Can I give you a scenario, something that a lot of our listeners will be familiar with? So, organizations go out of their way to draft out what they're really expecting from employees, personnel, third parties. This is what we need you to do when it comes to behaving around cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. And they create awareness programs, they get people to sign contracts, they go and do some great-looking, in some cases not so great-looking, computer-based training, and people then say, yes, I'm going to comply with this policy.
Yeah.
And then statistically, a significant number of them will not.
Yeah.
for me, coming back to the point you were making, is that we a failure in terms of designing the operating environment. I often use the phrase that security people really are choice architects. We design systems, which could be policies, processes, procedures, as well as technology. And we design them to either block choice, so we can stop you going to this website, for example, or stop you with putting this USB stick in. Or, there are policies where we're basically relying on people to do the right thing as defined through what is best practice.
Yeah.
Behavioural economics plays a role in how to better design that operating environment to maximise the potential for a positive outcome. Is that really what behavioural economics can do, based on what you're saying?
So the first thing is behavioral economics can help you identify what to do and what not to do.
Yeah.
And then it can help you change the motivation of how to get this done. So there's a story in the Bible where God comes to Sarah and says, Sarah, you're going to have a son. And Sarah laughs. And she says, how can I have a son when my husband is so old? And God says, don't worry, you'll have a son. And then God goes to Abraham and says, Abraham, you're going to have a son. And Abraham says, did you tell Sarah? And God says, yes. And Abraham says, and what did Sarah said? And God said, Sarah said, how could she have a son when she is so old? And God lies. And the religious scholars wondered, how can God lie? How can it be possible that God lies? And their conclusion was, it's okay to lie for peace at home. Now here's the big point about this. There are many human values. And dishonesty and all kinds of other infractions show themselves up when there's a trade-off between human values. Mm-hmm. So you ask yourself, how much do I care about Sarah or about Abraham's feeling, and how much do I care about honesty, right? And what happens is that there are many human values, and they're not all compatible all the time. Mm-hmm. So my imagination is you have IT professionals that for them, security is the highest value. But you have other people that have other values.
Yes.
Right? So I work at Duke University, and they happen to want us to work with a particular filing system for security, mm-hmm. which I just hate.
Yeah.
I just hate that security system. Mm-hmm. It's just, I find it cumbersome. I travel a lot. I travel, most of my time. Mm-hmm. 90% of my time I'm traveling. The VPN makes it much more difficult. Slows it down. When you're in Africa trying to connect over something that slows down, it doesn't work.
Yep.
And my cost of using the system that the IT people, so I have my own trade-offs, right? And my trade-off is that getting work done. That's mm-hmm. my life is defined against getting work done. So now the IT people want me to have their priorities, yep. but I have my priorities, and I'm willing to give up mm-hmm. their priorities. And it's not that I think I'm betraying my job when I do this. I think, in fact, I'm doing the right thing because I'm a researcher, right? Yeah. At the end of the day, if I spend my time, I'm not trying to blame IT professionals, but no. this is not the goal of this. But at the end of the day, if I spend my life living according to the IT system and hurts my productivity,
yeah.
I think it's a bad trade-off for the university. So now I might be wrong, but if you think about it this way, they have not changed my priorities, right? Mm-hmm. They basically are creating the obstacles, yeah. right? The IT people, from a behavioral economics perspective, are creating obstacles for productivity, mm-hmm. which is my number one priority. It's not that people do things on purpose. I think that most people are dedicated to their work.
Yeah.
It's just that the easiest path to get work mm-hmm. and get work done is the highest value is inconsistent yeah. with being safe.
So I have a point. I mean, you've got friction in terms of friction between you getting your job done
yeah.
and your values. Then you mentioned,
and then there's the hierarchy of values.
The hierarchy of values. But another one I want to bring in, which is something which is in the book, the concept of endowment. So the idea that people have contributed to something feel a greater sense of value about that something as well. So the question I asked, and this is not by the way, guys, girls at the security department within the university, this is not. The question I put to you, we know endowment works and it helps people sort of prioritize and put a value to something.
Yeah.
Were you involved at all in terms of defining, security in any way, or somebody that represents sort of scholars within the university? I think it's really interesting, that concept of endowment. Because often these things are designed without the user in mind, which is not, Steve Jobs would definitely have gone absolutely berserker on that one. But the sense of, if you involve the people that really, whose behaviours you are trying to influence through designing systems and processes, that the endowment kicks in. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So there's a version of the endowment effect that we call the IKEA effect, which I love that effect. This is,
here we go.
Okay, you told me that there's a surprise. Okay,
that's the leftover of the bed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So you did a bed. You created an IKEA bed, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh my goodness! You have lots of extra things happening, and the bed is stable.
Well, the children haven't fallen out of it yet.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Great. So here's my one of my early IKEA memories is I get a chest of drawers for my kids and for their toys, and I spend a way too long afternoon struggling with the chest of drawers. How long did the bed take you?
It was supposed to take 3 hours.
Yes.
It took 6.
Okay. And my experience at least was that it was frustrating, right? Putting things in the wrong place and the instructions were not as clear, and it really was an unpleasant experience. I've put some things before that were just pure joy, that everything fit and this was not it. But then I kept on looking back at this chest of drawers, and I kept on realizing we had the relationship. Like, I really cared about the chest of drawers. It wasn't particularly high quality and so on. And I wondered how much of my love for the chest of drawers, and I kept on moving it from house to house as we moved, how much of my love for this chest of drawers is driven by the fact that I built it. And in addition, how much of it is related to the fact that it was difficult to build, right? And we've done lots of tests on this. We got people to build origami and Legos and all kinds of things. And we found that when people build something, they overvalue it. And when the instructions are more difficult and it takes more time and it's more frustrating, people even overvalue it. And not only do people overvalue it, they think other people would overvalue it as well. Right? Yeah. So let's say we go tomorrow to your house and you show me this bed, and you basically say, Dan, how much would you buy this bed for? You expect me to say, $17,000. It's an amazing bed. Look at this. Not 17,000, but you overvalue this bed now compared to a bed that you didn't build, and you somehow wrongly think that I will overvalue it as well, because you say, clearly it's an amazing bed. Look how valuable it is. So if you think about this, what it suggests is that labor, particularly difficult labor, leads to love.
Labor leads to love. That's fantastic.
So now, what do we want to do? How do we want people in the organization to start caring about something? One approach is to get them to feel that they're invested. They're invested in this. Yeah. So that I think is one direction. I'll tell you another one. So this latest book is really a book on the psychology of money and the mistakes we make about money. But there's some things here that I think are related to security, because it is about value cues, right? So value cues are things like, if there's a particular nice label on wine, people pleasure center react differently. Yeah. If something is more expensive, people think it's probably worth more. But one of the ones that I like the most, that I think is relevant here, is about showing effort. So imagine you come to Durham, where I live, and you're trying to find a parking space. And you find a parking meter, and you look in your pockets, and you don't have a quarter. And somebody happens to pass by, and you say, hey, excuse me, do you have a quarter? And they say, yes, I have a quarter, I'll sell it to you for $1. And most people say, go away, I'm not not spending $1 for a quarter.
Yeah.
Case number 2, parking meter, nothing in your pocket, somebody passes by and you say, excuse me, do you have a quarter? And they say, look, I don't have a quarter, but there's a bank 4 blocks down the street. If you want, I'll run really fast to that bank. I'll change $1 for quarters. I'll run really fast back and I'll give you a quarter. But if I do all these things for you, how do you feel about giving me $1?
Yeah.
Now people feel great. It's an amazing deal. Now, in every possible way, you're worse off, right? You have to wait for them to run to the bank and back, right? You get a sweaty coin.
Yeah.
But why are you happier? Because somebody ran for you. And this is an insight from Mike Norton that basically says that online, we expect people to appreciate things without showing them effort. So think about restaurants. Restaurants are amazing in telling us, how many hours this piece of fish was marinated and where it came from and who picked this tomato. I mean, they're really amazing. And then they have open kitchens and they show us amazing amount of work.
Yeah.
Online, we don't see effort. We don't see labor. And the argument is because of that, we even don't appreciate anything. So do you know this website called Kayak?
Yes.
So Kayak is maybe one of the few exceptions that show you effort. And here's an experiment about Kayak. Condition 1, you type a search query, you press enter, you get the results immediately. Boom, right?
Yeah.
Condition 2, you type, you press enter, you get black screen with the wheel of death for 10 seconds, right? Just waiting and waiting and waiting, then you get the results.
Yeah.
Condition 3, you type, you press enter, you wait 10 seconds, same 10 seconds, but those 10 seconds are filled with, we're searching United, we're searching American, here's the results are being resorted by distance, time, with connection, without connection.
Yeah.
Now, what happens? People like this more than not waiting at all.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that if you ask people, do you want to wait more? They say, yes, please wait more. But the process gets them to figure out what they actually got. At the end of this process, they say, I could have never done this myself. They say, now I understand how many airlines they search, how many different combinations they search. I understand that they looked at direct, one stop over to time it takes to depart, check, connection, total time. And I understand now what I got. And this is true for lots of things. We expect people to know kind of that you give people something wonderful, you expect them to just appreciate it.
That is wonderful.
But how could people? And I think the security industry, and tell me if I'm wrong in this, is one of the most invisible industries unless something is wrong, right? So, but that's the exactly wrong place to be in, because everything you do to me as a user is just slowing me down, and it shows me no value. So imagine at the end of the year, let's say you were my security, designer. At the end of the year, you would want me to give you a tip. Right? I mean, you would basically want to have appreciation.
Yes.
Right? Or every day you would want me to give you a tip. Right? Ideally. What would you do? You would certainly communicate some things, right? You would certainly even spam, right? I mean, we take spam away. We don't tell people we've blocked this amount of attacks and we kept your data safe and here's what we've done. So there's lots of things to do to show the value. Otherwise, people just take you for granted. Now, you as a security expert are suffering from what we call the curse of knowledge.
Yes.
You know security. You think everybody else knows security by mistake, or at least you overestimate their knowledge. And you say, of course, people are grateful that I installed this, whatever it is, for them, and I'm blocking. The reality is that we take things for granted very fast. So, and you have to understand that part of your job as a security expert is not just to create security, but to create appreciation. Because if you create security with no appreciation, you're not going to get people to value it and want to participate in it, right? So, look, if you create anti-lock brakes and they're installing the cars, you don't have to create appreciation. But if you're relying on people to use something and update things, and then you have to build appreciation.
So really what we come back to there is transparency.
Yes.
To build value, so you need value to help basically stack the odds in your favor that somebody will choose something at a given time over other choices. To build value, part of that, the challenge we have is that the value of security isn't something, it's pretty abstract. It's not something that you see. And that actually one of the objectives for security professionals is that, we need to be more transparent with the target audience.
Just to be clear, the word transparent here is not like in the transparent financially. Mm-hmm. Transparent here is about helping people understand all the things that they should be grateful for. That's the meaning of transparency. Absolutely. Here.
Which is really interesting because I was doing, I was over in Estonia last
Mm-hmm.
week, and one of the things I was trying to get across to people there is that when we talk about information security awareness, the tendency is to mean we're going to make our employees aware.
Yes.
What we're not necessarily getting our heads around is becoming aware ourselves of what we're doing and how we're maybe getting it right or getting it wrong, or how effectively we're making people aware of things like the value. Mm-hmm. I can make you aware this is the policy you should comply with.
Yes.
Okay, but when you understand how people make the call about whether or not to comply with it, even though they've said they had,
that's right.
And it comes down to that value piece, and the value is like, okay, so how are you getting across, how are you promoting the value of this? If I often use the phrase, if security was a product, would you buy it? Buy it. By buy it, what I mean is, would you comply? Would you choose it over anything else?
Yeah. And if you don't understand the value, the odds are very, very low. And I'll tell you one other really challenging thing for security. Security failures happen infrequently. Mm-hmm. Right? So let's take something very different. Imagine that you drive around town and you think about texting while driving.
Right.
And you say, what are the odds of dying while texting and driving? And you say 1%. So you text and drive and nothing bad happens. Mm. At the end of this, what lesson do you learn? Do you say to yourself, oh, it's 1% chance, I was just lucky? Or do you say maybe it's 0.75%? So there is this cycle where when you do low probability events, when you're in the domain of low probability events and you do things that are bad and nothing bad happens to you, you learn the wrong lesson. So if you were texting and driving, and every time you text and drive 100% of the time, you would lose 10 pounds. Mm-hmm. Like your bank account would be charged. Yep. You would stop very quickly.
Yes.
But when it's a probabilistic reward, what happens is that you basically learn the wrong lesson. Every time you're not punished, you learn the wrong lesson. So when somebody like me is not using the recommended security measures, mm-hmm. and nothing bad happens to me, I just learned the wrong lesson. Yes. Right? So because I don't really understand, I'm using me as a kind of a general example of the uneducated security public, because I don't understand the real logic, I don't understand the real risk, I don't understand what you do for me, but I do see the cost, mm-hmm. the time, the challenges, the extra work needed. Every time I decide not to do the extra work, I get rewarded.
Yeah.
So now you ask, what force is going to work against this? And it has to be something about reciprocity, deep buy-in. It has to do something about understanding what's going on. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're fighting a set of very strong forces against you. Mm. If you're trying to get compliance. Yeah. In those cases.
But I think the thing you'll pick there is you might be fighting it, but you've got, it's almost like marginal gains, the opportunity for mm-hmm. small improvements across lots of different areas here. Yep. If you understand, where behavioural economics is coming from.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's what security professionals are all about. I mean, we can't guarantee 100% of anything. It's in life. What can you guarantee?
And I also understand from some of my hacker friends that it's usually people who are the easiest place to break, right? Yeah. And of course, if you don't understand how to motivate individuals to care more, people
Which brings me to an interesting question on motivation.
Yeah.
Financial motivation, short-term motivation against long-term motivation in terms of influencing behavior. So, many people think about, giving prizes, maybe financial prizes or some sort of physical asset, like, an iPad.
Yeah.
It seems to be quite common, as a motivating factor for people to take part in activities.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in both the Small Change book that's just come out, and also in your previous books as well, the distinct feeling I get is that financial motivation doesn't bring around long-term behavioural change. Is that true? Is that
Yeah. So there's lots of strange things about financial rewards. One of them is it's backward-looking more than forward-looking.
Okay.
Right? Because you basically say, I'm paying you back for what happened, rather than think about the future.
Yeah.
So here's an example, and I'm taking this to a different. Last year, I wanted to give the people in my lab a gift for the end of the year.
Okay.
And I thought, like everybody else, I could give people a bonus.
Okay.
Right? But a bonus is backward-looking for me. It's like saying, here is what you did for me, for the group in the last year, and I'm paying you back for it. I want to do it forward-looking. I want appreciation to be built, like we have a future together, right? So I want something that looks for the future, not looks backward. And then I want to show people that I care about them as human beings, not just about how they work.
Yeah.
And I wanted this gift to be a kind of gift that people would remember, so we kind of keep on giving, because otherwise people forget.
Very quickly.
Yes. So what I did was I asked everybody in the lab to tell me something that they want to learn as a person, not for work.
Right.
Where they want to learn it in the world.
Okay.
And I said, I'll send them to learn that thing for up to 10 days anywhere in the world.
I need to come and work for you.
Well, so here's the thing. It was an amazing gift. People thought about all kinds of things. They went to do amazing stuff. For the whole year, the lab was buzzing as people were leaving and coming back and sharing what they were doing. At the end of the day, it wasn't very expensive. Think about it. What would you like to learn? If I said now, meditation, what would you like to learn?
Another language.
What language would you like to learn?
French.
So, 10 days in France, it's just not that expensive.
No,
right? But, even some people in the lab went to Indonesia to watch some ceremonies. People went to Japan. People went to India to learn meditation. None of those things are very expensive. It's actually, when you think about this, if you really want to learn that, taking 2 weeks and doing something, it's shocking that we don't do it. But it's a tremendous gift because it's something that says, I care about you. I want you to improve in something. And then if you acquire the new skill, you have it for a long time. Now, I'm bringing this up just because when we think about motivation, the things that really create motivation are very different than just giving people bonuses. But often we just try to give people a little bit of money here and there as a motivation. It's rarely, actually probably never, the best way to get people to truly care.
It's interesting. Yeah. And I like the idea of the looking forward. It's something that's quite close to me, is that sense of it also builds trust. To give something to somebody in advance of years' worth of great work is about building trust. And I do think that trust is something we're seeing increasingly being eroded. People don't feel they can trust the people that they spend 8, 9, 10 hours a day working with, 5 days, 60 days a week. There's this eroding of that trust, which is interesting because the eroding of the trust and how that may have an impact upon the decisions that people make within organizations as well. So thinking forward rather than backward, I really like that idea. Yeah.
Remind me, I'll send you something I wrote on trust.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it is a very important topic.
Okay. I'm just thinking about time. There's 2 things that I really wanted to get done. We trust ourselves.
Yes.
Okay. In the book, there's this sense of we have this confidence, an overconfidence in our own sense of knowledge and ability. So I'm interested in that. And then after we've sort of done that, I really want to get a question in from one of our listeners, Ross Moore, over in the US.
Sure. So I'll tell you about quickly about we trust ourselves. The notion is, this is what we call self-herding, is that when we make one decision in a new domain, we think to ourselves that it has to be a good decision, and therefore we follow it up for a longer time. So this is also sometimes called anchoring, where you act in a particular way, and then you remember how you acted, and it just becomes a string of behaviors from there on. Right.
Okay. Do you think one of the things that we do see where people they tend to train and go, yeah, I knew that all. Or you talk to people generally, maybe as part of an interview process of gathering information, doing some research around with employees, and even amongst security professionals, the sense of people have this I'm on top of this. And you're like, the thing to me is on top of this relative to what?
Yeah.
On top of this relative to your own knowledge, which then I'm thinking, okay, there's a bias kicking in here that obviously they're on top of it. And then there's on top of it compared to a competency assessment.
Yeah.
So is that something?
There is a tremendous sense that there's a tremendous machinery that justifies our choices, and one of the biggest challenges is to get people to acknowledge that we're fallible. And I sometimes use visual illusions because they demonstrate so clearly that we're fallible, but not in a direction that threatens our ego.
Yeah.
And then I ask people if they overeat and undersave and text and drive. And when people say yes, I say, okay, now we've just admitted that we all make mistakes that could kill us and other people. Let's look at other mistakes we might be making. So I think it's important to acknowledge how often we are, and then take it from there.
Okay. So what I'm going to do now is just going to bring up Ross's question that he sent into me. In fact, I think the question just goes to the heart of why most of our listeners are going to be tuned in today. How can I take the complex aspects of behavioural economics and irrationality and bring it to the typical employee?
To the typical employee where? Anywhere?
Anywhere, and that's actually a really good question.
Okay. So here's my metaphor for behavioral economics. It's like sending a rocket to space. And you have two questions. You have a question of how you reduce friction and how you add more fuel.
Right.
And reducing more friction is how do you get the path of least resistance?
Right.
How do you get unnecessary steps out? And adding more fuel is adding more motivations.
Right.
And the second question is tough. Right? The second question is tougher, adding more motivation. This has to do with adding social proof and loss aversion and all kinds of things that you would need. The path of least resistance is easier. And I would recommend that you take every business process you have and you, like a good hacker, you write down every step in the process. Write down every step in the process. You have to fill this and they do this and they do this and do this. And then you say which one of those steps is unneeded. And which one of those we can eliminate, and which one of those the default is not set up correctly. And if you look at this, just look at the forms that each organization has. Here's one trivial example. Every bank has a form for automatic depositing salaries into the bank, right?
Right.
I have not seen a single form in a single country that has a field for checking and savings.
Right.
All the forms just deposit into checking, and then you have to hunt for another form to move money into savings. Can't possibly be the right behavior, right? Now, you can argue whether savings should be 20% or 15 or 12, but you can't argue that it should be zero and not present on the form. So the easiest way to do it is to basically get people to think about small details, about small friction, and to go over every business process and looking at every little steps and basically saying, what can I eliminate or what can I change the default of?
Yeah. Okay. That's a brilliant answer. I'm passionate about process redesign when it comes to behavior.
Yeah.
I really, there's a tendency to think, let's create these really great slick campaigns. They look like an advert that's been run through a global comms agency. They, almost CSI, and you're like, but we could just make the process more easy, and that it increases the likelihood that people are going to want to buy into it. And then you include things like endowment and get people involved in actually defining what the process is going to be.
That's right.
And I just generally believe that that's good. Those are marginal gains. We're going to shift it a little bit in the right direction. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. That's brilliant. I really, really enjoyed it. I could keep you pinned here, but I know that you've got a really, really busy couple of days before you get back to the US.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining us on the show.
My pleasure.
It's been absolutely enlightening. For those of you listening, we've got Small Change, the book which Dan's just brought out, Money Mishaps and How to Avoid Them. You know, when I read this, I didn't realize I was looking at tents. I went to Go Outdoors, the big camping store here with my children this weekend, and I saw this bargain on a shelf. So I wasn't there to buy a beach tent. Yes. Okay, I was there buying something else, and I picked that, and then I saw this bargain on the shelf, and I looked at it and I went, wow, that's down from this price, and it's now at that price. And I thought, and for a minute, do you know what I did? I picked it off the shelf. I thought, that's a bargain. And then I was like, then I went back to your book.
Yes.
And I was like,
but if it wasn't the discounted price from the beginning, would I buy it?
Would I buy it? That was what I was like, and actually, do I really need it? Actually, am I here? And I was justifying to myself, well, we're going to go on holiday this summer. It's always a windy beach. It'd be great to have that. But I'm like, opportunity cost. Yeah, that came into my mind. Yeah, so...
Very good. I'm happy I saved you a tent.
You saved me the tent. The children will be cold on the beach, though. Well, but that's okay. We'll just get them to run around. But yeah, so everybody out there, Small Change by Dan Ariely, which is all about money mishaps and how to avoid them. And I do genuinely believe that when you read it, it starts helping us get to the root cause behind the decisions we make. And I just think there's a lot of lessons there that we could be applying within the information security industry. So thanks for all your hard work.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you found that chat that we just had with Dan Ariely of real value. I'm still blown away that a person who's been instrumental in how I've rethought the human factor, and with a specific focus really more upon the behavioural side, but interestingly through all my research, which is involved looking at Dan's work, seeing the relationship between awareness, behaviour and culture, that holistic approach, it really, really goes without saying he's been instrumental in terms of how I've rethought the human factor and resulted in me developing the SABAC framework to help security professionals. So I was really touched that he spent the time. What is over here as part of his publishing of the new book. And the new book, just to remind you, is called Small Change by Dan Ariely. The book is about money mishaps and how to avoid them. But what he does is he looks at how we process data, how we make decisions, and how those decisions are influenced by a range of biases and heuristics, which can lead to us making choices which aren't as positive as we would hope. But he also reflects upon the fact that people design choices, and you can design choices to result in positive outcomes. And people are using choice architecture to get people to, buy products. And I'm asking the question, well, can we use choice architecture? Can we use the science, to increase the likelihood that people will choose the security product, choose to comply with it? And once they've actually bought the product, so to speak, that they'll come back and they'll want to buy it again. So this is the ongoing compliance. Really, really interesting. That book and all of his books are all about those things of judgment and decision-making, choice architecture, and they're really, really important to all the work I've been doing over the last 6 years in this field. If you found, and I hope you did, the podcast of interest, I've got a little plea to make. Could you provide us with a testimonial? Could you use iTunes, for example, to provide a testimonial and rank the podcast? Or any of the other platforms we use to share this podcast? If you like, you can drop us an email. You can drop me personally an email at bruce.hallis@marmaladebox.com and let me know what you think about the show, because we want everybody else to know that the show, even though it's relatively new, is adding value. And the other thing is, I want to share that with the team here at Marmalade Box and Rethinking Human Factor podcast, because they work really hard, often late at night, because I get things to them really late. And they're really passionate about trying to tell the story and trying to introduce everybody in the community to the insights that have come out from our research. So, we talked about motivations. That's the sort of motivation that keeps them going, other than, tea and biscuits from Bruce. So, yeah, if you love it, please do let us know. Third point, if you love it and you want to stay in contact, best ways for you to stay in contact with regards to the podcast and all things around awareness, behaviour and culture that come out of our thinking here at Marmalade Box as well. Best way, sign up to the RSS feeds on the Marmalade Box website or iTunes. We do a monthly update, which is like a newsletter, and that's basically a hash of the things we found interesting around awareness, behaviour and culture, the articles and blogs that we've written around that subject matter. There's also a book recommendation based upon my research over the 6 years, a book that I found really helpful. We also have what was the last podcast or what the next podcast is going to be. And we also sort of just have a general wrap up of my thoughts around any of the events that I've been at and what I found valuable. And as a final point, it provides you with the opportunity to submit your own question to the podcast for our guests. This was a new feature we rolled out last month. We had 4 questions submitted to us for the interview with Dan Ariely. And on this occasion, Ross Moore was the person that we chose. And hopefully, Ross, you got an answer to your question. If you didn't, give me a shout and we can have a further chat. Without further ado, I've got to bring this all to an end because I'm very, very excited about what's happened. We've got some really, really interesting people that are lined up to come and share insights around awareness, behaviour and culture and give you, our listeners, some key lessons and topics to go away and research yourself. I hope you found it interesting. I really hope to have you tune in for the next podcast.